Welcome to Inside the Philippines. Most of the stories we tell on this channel end the same way. The man loses the money. Sometimes a lot of it. Sometimes all of it. He comes home, if he comes home, quieter than when he left, and a bit less willing to trust the version of himself that thought he knew what he was doing. This one is different. Not because nothing happened. Something happened. Something was absolutely being run on this man, and it was being run well, by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. But today's protagonist caught it. Not immediately. Not before it cost him anything. But early enough that when I tell you how it ends, you'll feel something closer to relief than devastation. His name is Brendan. He's 65 years old. He's from Limerick, in the west of Ireland. And he spent 38 years as a plumber. Not a company plumber, not a site manager, a working plumber, on his knees in other people's homes, diagnosing problems and fixing them. He retired because his body told him to. He came to the Philippines because a man from his football club told him it was warm and cheap, and nobody would look at him sideways. What he found in Cebu was not what he expected, and the way he handled it, I think, will stay with you. Here's his story, in his own words. Right, so, I want to be upfront about something before I start. I'm not a dramatic man, never have been. Marayad used to say I could report a flood in the same tone I'd use to say the tea was ready. So, if this comes out a bit flat in places, that's just how I am. I'll try and give you the full picture, but I'm not going to dress it up. I was a plumber for 38 years. Started as an apprentice at 17, barely knew one end of a wrench from the other, and by the time I retired, I'd seen every bodged repair in the Western world, and sorted most of them. You learn a way of looking at things in that job. You learn not to trust what a wall looks like on the outside. You learn that a thing can seem absolutely fine and be catastrophically wrong underneath. And the only way to know is to check. Don't assume. Don't guess. Check. I wish I'd applied that more consistently in Cebu, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My wife, Myriad, got sick in 2019, ovarian cancer. By 2020, I'd stopped taking any jobs, not formally retired, just stopped, because she needed round-the-clock care, and that was that. 38 years of working every day, and I stopped without a second thought. And she was more important. She was always more important. She died in the spring of 2022. I'm going to say that plainly because that's the only way I can say it. She died. She had 3 bad years, and then she died, and the house in Limerick, our house, the house we'd lived in for 24 years, went completely silent. I'd walk into rooms, and there'd be no reason to be in them. I'd make 2 cups of tea out of habit, and then stand there looking at the second one going cold. I sold the house 4 months later. I know some people thought that was too fast. My daughter Niav definitely thought it was too fast. But I couldn't fix that particular problem by staying in it. And I am, at my core, a man who needs to do something when something is wrong. I had just under 155,000 euros from the sale, sitting in an account, and no idea what to do next. But I wasn't looking for a new woman. I want to make that clear. I was 64 years old, my knees were destroyed, and I had spent the previous 18 months learning to cook soup and sleeping in a chair beside a hospital bed. Romance was not on my mind. What was on my mind was something to do with myself. Some reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just waiting for the day to be over. That's when Desi started up. Desi Moran. I've known him since we were teenagers at Garryowen. We played junior hurling together badly for about 3 seasons. Desi had moved to Cebu about 2 years prior. His wife had passed as well, a few years before Marayad, and at some point he'd just gone. He'd send these WhatsApp photos of himself sitting outside a cafe in the sunshine, shirt open, San Miguel in hand, looking annoyingly content. "Sus, come over, Bren," he kept saying. "It's warm, it's cheap, and nobody knows your business." That last part mattered more than I expected it to. In Limerick, everyone knew Brendan who'd lost Mairead. I couldn't go to the shop without someone giving me the eyes. The sympathy eyes. I know it came from good intentions. I know. But there's only so many times you can stand in the vegetable aisle of Tesco being looked at like a wounded dog before you start to need somewhere that nobody knows what happened to you. So I booked a one-way ticket to Cebu, Philippine Airlines out of Dublin, change in Abu Dhabi. I told Niamh and her sister Sorcha the week before I left, not to ask permission. I'm 64. I'm not asking my daughter's permission to go on holiday. But because I'm not a monster, and they deserve to know. Niamh said, "Dad, this is a bit sudden." Sorcha said, "Dad, are you okay?" I told them both I'd be grand. I wasn't entirely sure that was true, but it seemed like the right thing to say. I landed in Macton on a Tuesday morning in April. The heat hit me coming out of arrivals like opening an oven door. Not warm, hot. The kind of hot that tells you immediately that you are not in Ireland and never have been. There was a taxi rank with 30 drivers all saying my name apparently. And the noise, jeepneys, motorbikes, someone's phone playing something cheerful at full volume. One stood there for about a minute, just getting my bearings. Desi had sorted me a room at a guest house in Lahug, 10 minutes from where he lived. Mid-range place, clean, air-conditioned, fan in the bathroom that rattled a bit, logbook on the reception desk, the smell of floor cleaner and something floral I never identified. My room had a window that looked onto a narrow street where there was a Sari store that seemed to operate 24 hours, and a rooster that had no interest in conventional timekeeping. It suited me fine. I spent the first week doing very little, which, for me, is deeply unnatural. I walked, I sweated, I ate things I couldn't name and mostly found them grand. Desi brought me into the rhythms of it. Coffee in the mornings at a place on Salinas Drive, the SM City Mall in the afternoons, if it got too hot outside, evenings in a sports bar off General Maxilom, where a cluster of foreign men would sit under slow ceiling fans, watching their respective home sports on a TV that was too small for the room, and arguing about nothing in particular. I liked it more than I expected. Nobody in that bar knew who I was. Nobody knew about Mairead, or the house, or the chair I'd slept in. I was just a big Irish fella who drank his beer slowly and didn't say much. That anonymity, I hadn't realized how badly I needed it until I had it. There was a Dutchman at the guest house, been there 3 years apparently, name of Roloff, retired engineer, quiet type. Sat in the common area most evenings with a paperback and a Coke, didn't initiate conversation, but if you said something he'd answer sensibly. The kind of man you instinctively trust without being able to say exactly why. I find that with tradespeople sometimes. There's a quality of attention that certain people have, a way of actually looking at things. Roloff had it. He barely figures in the first part of this story, and he figures considerably more later. By the 9th day, I was restless. I'm not built for idleness. 38 years of physical daily work does something to your sense of what a day is supposed to feel like. And a day with nothing to do still feels faintly wrong to me, like a tap left running somewhere. I wandered down toward the IT Park area. Desi had mentioned it. Modern part of the city, big glass buildings, young people everywhere. And I saw a wellness center. Frosted glass frontage, professional-looking sign, laminated menu of services in the window. 60 minutes, Traditional Filipino massage, 500 pesos. That's about €8. I thought, my back has been in bits since the flight. This seems reasonable. I went in. I did not think anything significant was about to happen. I thought I was getting a massage. And I didn't know who I was without something to fix. I hadn't said that out loud until just now, and I'm not going to dwell on it. But it's true, and it's relevant to everything that follows. I came to the Philippines not looking for a woman, but I came carrying a long habit of being useful, and 3 years of watching someone I loved need things I couldn't always provide fast enough. And somewhere in my nervous system, those two things had got tangled up in a way I didn't fully understand. The woman at the front desk asked if I had a preference. I said I didn't. She assigned me to a masseuse named Glaza. The wellness center was called something like Harmony or Serenity, one of those words they put on places to tell you it's not a dodgy establishment. I didn't pay much attention to the name. I paid attention to the fact that the reception area had a printed schedule on the wall, a logbook with signatures, and a staff member in a proper uniform who asked me to fill in a form about any injuries or medical conditions. That's the detail I keep coming back to. There was a form. Glaza came out to collect me from reception. Mid-30s, I'd say. Small, which most people are compared to me. Professional manner, the kind of person who doesn't need to fill silence. She showed me to the room, explained what she'd be doing, asked once if the pressure was all right, and then got on with it without further ceremony. She was good at her job. Very good, actually. By the end of the hour, my back felt better than it had in months, possibly years. I tipped 200 pesos on top of the 500 peso rate, about €3. I always over-tip. It's a habit I picked up in the trade. People used to make me tea and biscuits while I worked under their sinks, and I always felt the least I could do was leave something extra. Merayad used to say I'd tip the postman if I could work out a reasonable mechanism for it. I didn't think about Glaza again that evening. I went back to the guest house, had a shower, ate at a carinderia down the road where I pointed at something in a tray, and it turned out to be pork adobo, and was absolutely the right choice. I slept well for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, my back was tight again. I'd walked further than I should have, old habit, and I went back to the wellness center. I asked for Glaza by name, not for any romantic reason. I want to be clear about that. Because it's easy to read things backwards and make yourself sound more foolish than you were. I asked for her because she'd been good, and I don't like surprises. If a thing works, you don't go looking for a different version of it. That's just sense. She was available. We went through the same routine. I tipped the same amount. Left. Third visit, same again. Fourth visit, she greeted me by name before I'd said anything. Just, "Mr. Brendan, Poe, same as usual?" And I said yes, and that was that. I noticed I liked being recognized. It's a small thing, being known somewhere. After 18 months of being invisible in my own house, and then 2 years of being the widower in Tesco, being a regular somewhere, even a massage place, even here, it felt like something. Now, I want to stop here and say something because I think it's important. I'd read the forums before I came. I'm not a completely naive man. I knew about the bar girl economy, the Gcash requests, the romance scams targeting foreign men of a certain age. There are entire websites dedicated to warning people like me about exactly this kind of thing. I'd read them. I thought I had a reasonable picture. But here's what those forums talk about. Bars, dating apps, women who approach you on the street, women who want you to buy them a drink, and then introduce you to their sister, and so on. Glaza was none of that. Glaza worked a legitimate wellness center near the IT park. She clocked in and out. She had a schedule, a uniform, a logbook. When I offered her my phone number, and I want to be precise here, I offered it, she did not ask for it, I framed it as practical. See, in case you're not rostered when I want to come in, I'll ring ahead to check. That was genuinely my reason. She accepted it without any particular enthusiasm, just said, "Okay, Poe," and typed it in. She didn't text me that evening to say hello. She didn't send a good morning message the next day. That restraint. I read it as character, as dignity. I think about that a fair bit now. Over the next week or so, the appointments started running slightly over the hour. Not dramatically. 5, 10 minutes. Glaza would ask questions while I was getting ready to leave, standing in the waiting area. About Ireland, mainly. Whether it was really as cold as people said. Whether Limerick was near Dublin. What the food was like. Small curiosity questions, the kind you'd ask anyone from a place you'd never been. I answered them. She listened. She didn't pepper me with more questions than was natural. 1 or 2, then she'd let it sit. I mentioned Myriad once. Just in passing, I was explaining why I'd sold the house and moved, and her name came up. Glaza said she was sorry. Then she changed the subject. She didn't push me to talk about it, didn't offer prayers or condolences in the way that sometimes feels like a door being opened that you haven't invited anyone through. She just acknowledged it and moved on. That also read as character. She reminded me, a small bit, of someone who waits for you to be ready, instead of rushing you. I know how that sounds now. I know exactly how that sounds, but at the time I thought, this is a decent person, a professional, someone with good instincts about other people. And the thing is, and this is the part one have spent the most time thinking about, every escalation in those first 3 weeks came from me. Every single one. She never suggested we get coffee. I suggested it, one afternoon when the appointment ended, and I had nowhere to be, and there was a place next door. She said she had a few minutes. We sat, we talked, she had a Milo. I had an iced coffee that was mostly condensed milk, and I was fine with that. We did the same thing the following week, and the week after. From the outside, I imagined this looked like something. From the inside, it felt like having a conversation with a person who was interested in you as a person, which is not nothing when you've been invisible for 2 years. We were not romantic. I'm not going to pretend there was no warmth between us, because there was. But it wasn't. I wasn't building a future in my head. I wasn't. I was just glad to have someone to talk to who wasn't Desi going on about property prices in Mandaue. She was good company. That's the truth of it. She was good company, and she was good at her job, and I had absolutely no reason, at that point, to think anything was wrong. For the first time in 3 years, I had absolutely nothing I was supposed to be doing. I hadn't realized how much that would feel like falling. And Glaza, without trying, or rather, while trying very carefully and very quietly, gave me something that felt like ground. That's what a good setup does, I suppose. You don't feel the hook going in. The cafe where she told me about her mother was called something with brew in the name. There are about 40 of them in Cebu, and all serving the same iced coffees in tall glasses with too much ice and not enough cup. It was on a side street off the main road near the wellness center. Small place, ceiling fan that did its best, a refrigerated case with slices of cake that looked like they'd been there a while. We'd been going there for maybe 2 weeks at that point. It was our habit by then, or what I'd decided was our habit. After appointments, if she didn't have another client and I had nowhere to be, which I never did, Milo for her, iced coffee for me, 40 minutes, conversation about nothing much. I want to be honest about what I was getting from those afternoons because I think it matters. I wasn't falling for her. I wasn't constructing some fantasy. It was simpler than that, and also, I suppose, more embarrassing. I just liked having somewhere to go. A routine. Something that happened at a particular time because of a particular reason. For 3 years, my days had been organized entirely around Miriad's needs. Medications at certain hours, appointments, meals she could manage to eat. And then suddenly, nothing. No shape to anything. The wellness center, the cafe, Glaza asking me things about Ireland in that careful, listening way she had. It gave the day a structure. That's all it was. That's what I told myself anyway. We were sitting in that cafe, a Tuesday afternoon, and Glaza was quiet for a bit longer than usual, stirring her Milo. I asked if she was all right. She said yes, she was fine. It was nothing. She was sorry. Then she said her mother needed an operation, cataract surgery. Her mother lived in Tagbilaran. That's the main town on Bohol, at about 2 hours by fast ferry from Cebu. She'd been having trouble with her vision for a year, and the doctor had told her recently that if she didn't get it done soon, she'd lose the sight in that eye entirely. The cost was 35,000 pesos, about 550 euros. She said this the way you'd tell someone about a problem you were carrying around and needed to set down for a moment. Not asking. Explicitly not asking. She actually said, at some point in there, "I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed to tell someone." Then she changed the subject. Asked me something about whether I'd seen the Sinologue Festival, whether I knew about it. I sat with it for 2 days. Now, I know what you're thinking. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't know what I was doing when I opened the Gcash app. I knew it was money. I knew it was more money than a masseuse earning maybe 18,000 pesos a month could easily put together. But I had 155,000 euros sitting in an account in Limerick, earning nothing. I had no mortgage, no dependents, no expenses beyond what this place cost me to live, which wasn't much. 35,000 pesos is 550 euros. That's not a significant sum to me. It would have been significant to Miriad's mother. It was significant to Glaza's mother, if she existed. And if she didn't exist, well, I'd decide that later. At the time, the maths seemed clear enough. I told Glaza the next afternoon at the cafe that I'd sorted the money. She went very still for a moment, and then her eyes filled up, and she said, "Thank you," in a way that, look, it didn't feel performed. I've watched people perform gratitude, and I've watched people feel it. And the difference is usually visible if you pay attention. This felt real. The way she pressed her lips together and looked away for a second before she could say anything. Maybe it was real. I still don't know. I've thought about it a lot, and I genuinely don't know. She sent her mother's Gcash number. I transferred the money. The whole thing took 4 minutes on my phone. 10 days later, over the same iced coffee in the same cafe with the same unhappy ceiling fan, she mentioned her nephew. Her sister's boy, 12 years old, good student apparently, but the school enrollment deadline was coming, and her sister had had a difficult few months, some problem with her husband's work that Glaza didn't elaborate on. The enrollment was 18,000 pesos, about 280 euros. Same delivery. Mentioned once, not pushed. Changed the subject herself. I noticed, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this was the second time. I noticed it the way you notice that a tap is dripping. You register it, you file it, you tell yourself you'll have a look at it later. I sent the money. The third one came about a week after that. A loan, she was careful to call it. Her salary from the wellness center was delayed. Some administrative problem, she'd get it sorted. She was embarrassed even to mention it. And she needed 22,000 pesos to cover rent and a few things. She'd pay it back the following week when her salary cleared. She wrote this to me on WhatsApp because she was too embarrassed to say it in person, she said. I said it was fine. I sent 22,000 pesos, roughly 340 euros. I did not think very hard about whether I expected to get it back. The fourth one had a different texture. I remember that. It came on a Wednesday, by WhatsApp message, rather than in person. She was sorry to bother me. It was something she had to get checked at a clinic. A women's thing, she was embarrassed to say exactly. Nothing serious, she thought, but the doctor wanted to do some tests to be sure. 14,000 pesos. About 220 euros. The embarrassment felt real. The hesitation felt real. I didn't ask questions because she'd made it clear she was uncomfortable. And I'm not the sort of man who presses people on things they find difficult to discuss. I sent the money. 4 transfers. 89,000 pesos in total. Just under 1,400 euros. I hadn't added it up. That's the thing I want you to understand, because I think it's the central mechanism of the whole thing. I wasn't processing it as a total. I was processing it as 4 separate situations, each one reasonable on its own terms, each one modest enough that it didn't feel like a decision that needed examining too carefully. A mother's eye surgery, a nephew's school, a short-term loan, a medical check. Any one of those, in isolation, is the kind of thing a decent person helps with when they have the means and someone they know is struggling. I learned later that in expat circles, there's a name for this approach: planting the seed. You don't ask, you confide. You share a problem as a burden you're carrying, not a request you're making, and you let the other person decide to volunteer. It puts them in the position of helper rather than victim. It makes the whole thing feel like their idea. Which, to be fair, it was. Every single time, it was my idea. I've spent my whole adult life being the person people called when something needed sorting. But 38 years of turning up when something was broken and leaving when it was fixed. That was my identity. That was how I understood my own usefulness in the world. And somewhere in the machinery of what happened with Glaza, that instinct, the need to be the one who fixes things, was the exact lever she was pulling. Not because everyone is like that. Plenty of men came to this country for entirely different reasons and got taken in entirely different ways. But for me, for a man who'd spent 3 years watching someone he loved need things he couldn't provide fast enough, being needed again felt like. It felt like something I hadn't realized I was still hungry for. That's the honest answer. That's what it cost me to understand. It was a Thursday evening, about 5 weeks in, and I was sitting in the common area of the guest house, the ground floor room with the ceiling that leaked slightly when it rained hard, 2 plastic chairs and a low table, and a fan that oscillated back and forth with the determined patience of something that had been doing it for 20 years. I just confirmed a GCash transfer on my phone, the medical check money, 14,000 pesos. I put the phone in my shirt pocket and reached for my San Miguel. Roloff was in the other chair, paperback face down on his knee, Coke in hand. He'd been there when I came in. We'd nodded at each other in the way we had, which was the entirety of our usual greeting. He said, "How much so far?" No preamble, not accusatory, just a question, the way an engineer might ask what pressure you're running a line at. Informational. I wasn't embarrassed, and I want to be clear about that. I hadn't done anything I thought was wrong, and I don't respond well to the assumption that I have. If he'd said it differently, If there'd been any edge to it, any implication that I was being an Egypt, I'd have told him it was none of his business and meant it. But it wasn't like that. It was just a question. So I answered it, out loud for the first time, adding it up as I spoke. Mother's surgery, 35,000 pesos. Nephew's school, 18,000 pesos. The loan, 22,000 pesos. The clinic, 14,000 pesos. I said, 89,000 pesos. About 1,400 euros. Roelof nodded, took a drink of his Coke. Outside on the street, a jeepney went past with its sound system going, some bright, cheerful pop song muffled through the wall. He didn't say I was stupid. He didn't say she was definitely running something. And he didn't tell me about his own experiences, or give me a lecture about Filipino women, or expat mistakes, all of which I would have tuned out immediately. What he said was this: ask her something that requires her to actually know you. Not how are you, not how was your day. Something specific you told her 3 or 4 weeks ago. See what comes back. Then he picked up his paperback again. I sat with it for the rest of the evening. I went up to my room, lay on the bed with the ceiling fan turning overhead, and tried to think of what I'd actually told her about myself. Not the surface things, the job, the weather in Ireland, Limerick being in Munster, not Connacht, the basic biographical information anyone might retain. Something specific, something that required actually listening. I'd mentioned my daughters in the second week. I was sure of it. We'd been at the cafe, and she'd asked if I had children, and I'd said yes, 2 girls, Niav and Sorcia, both in their 30s now, both living their own lives. I'd said their names clearly because she'd asked how you pronounced them, and I'd explained, the way you always have to with Irish names. Niav like Neve, Sorcia like Suraka, roughly. She'd repeated them carefully. I'd thought, she's paying attention. She remembers things. The following evening I met Glaza after her shift. We walked to the cafe, same table, same routine, iced coffee and Milo. The usual 20 minutes of easy conversation. She mentioned something about a colleague at the wellness center. I mentioned that Desi had dragged me to some property exhibition at the SM City, which I had no interest in. Ordinary, comfortable. And then, in the middle of saying something about Desi, I introduced a son. Casually, mid-sentence, as if correcting an earlier story. He reminds me a bit of my son, actually. Desi does. Same way of... And I kept talking, kept the sentence going, gave her no obvious invitation to react. She said, "Your son sounds like a good boy." Just that. Warm. Nodding slightly as she said it, the way she did when she was being agreeable. No correction, no confusion. No, wait, I thought you said you had daughters. None of that. She'd moved on to the next part of what one was saying before I'd finished processing what she'd just said. I smiled. I kept talking. I finished the story about Desi and the property exhibition. She laughed in the right places. And 20 minutes later I said goodnight and walked back to the guest house in the warm evening air with the smell of grilled fish coming from somewhere and someone's karaoke starting up 2 streets over. A woman doing her best with a Celine Dion song, giving it everything she had. I sat on the edge of my bed. A plumber learns early that there are 2 kinds of problems. There's the problem you can see, the visible leak, the obvious crack, the burst pipe that's already flooded the kitchen. That's actually the easier kind. You know exactly what you're dealing with. Then there's the problem that presents as fine. Everything looks normal. The pressure seems right. Nothing is obviously wrong. But there's a sound that doesn't quite fit, or a reading that's slightly off, and you've been in enough walls to know that sound means something. Now that reading means something. The pipe is fine, until it isn't. I hadn't been angry at that moment in the cafe. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters to the story. I hadn't been devastated or betrayed, or any of the other things you might expect. What I felt was closer to professional recognition. The feeling of having correctly identified what something is. Grim, a bit, but clarifying. She didn't know I had daughters. She'd never retained it. Which meant she probably hadn't retained much else either. Which meant the conversations I thought we'd been having. The ones where she asked about Ireland and listened carefully and remembered things. Those weren't quite what I'd thought they were. Or they were, but not for the reasons I'd thought. I thought about the crying when I'd told her about the mother's surgery money, and whether that was real. I still don't know. I've gone back and forth on it. A woman earning 18,000 pesos a month, on her feet all day touching strangers' backs and feet and shoulders, in a country where sending your mother for cataract surgery on your own salary would take 2 months of saving nothing else. I can construct a version of Glaza where the tears were entirely real and the money was genuinely needed, and the fact that she was also, at the same time, running a system on me doesn't make the tears false. Both things can exist. Poverty doesn't make people saints. It doesn't make them monsters either. But I was now sitting on a bed in La Hogue, thinking about a woman who, 5 minutes ago, had called my non-existent son a good boy without hesitation, and I needed to know what I was actually dealing with. And the way I'd been taught to find out, the way every decent tradesperson is taught to find out, is not to guess, not to assume, not to confront a wall you haven't tested. You isolate the system. You run controlled pressure through it. You watch where it fails. I had an idea. It was going to require Roloff's assistance, which I was fairly certain he'd provide, because Roloff struck me as a man who found a certain dry entertainment in how the world worked. I was right about that. I went downstairs to find him. Roloff was still in the same chair. He'd moved on to a different coke. I sat down and explained what I wanted to do. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to use my photos?" Not a question. I said yes. Just a couple. Nothing identifying. Not his face, because that might cause complications if Glaza had ever crossed paths with him around the guest house area. He had a cousin in Rotterdam, he said, who was around 50. Unforgettable in a useful way. He'd look through his phone. I said I was sorry to involve him. He said, "I find this interesting, actually." And that was that. He showed me 3 photos of a man with a gray beard and a sensible jacket standing in front of what looked like a canal. I said that would do fine. The second SIM card cost me 99 pesos at the convenience store on the ground floor of a small building near the IT park. Less than €2, which I mention only because there is something quietly absurd about the economy of the whole operation. 99 pesos to find out the truth about 89,000 pesos. I'd never set up a dating profile before in my life, which I want to acknowledge, because it required more effort than I expected. The apps are not designed for people who find the whole enterprise mildly undignified, but I got there. Dort Martin, 52. Dutch national, recently retired, currently in Cebu for 3 months on an extended holiday, enjoying the weather and the food, open to meeting people. The photo of Roloff's cousin looking inoffensive beside a canal. I kept the bio short, warm but vague. Nothing that could trip me up in conversation. I set the profile live on a Saturday morning, and then I waited. The first 2 days, nothing from Glaza. I wasn't surprised. I hadn't approached her profile, and I wasn't going to. The whole point was to see if she'd come to me, which she would only do if she was actively working the app. I continued meeting her after her shifts. Milo and iced coffee. Normal. She asked me if I'd been to Magellan's Cross yet, and I said not yet. And she said I should go. It's important history. Very beautiful. I said I'd try to make time. No, nothing was different on the surface. Day 6 of the profile being active. The app showed a match with a profile I recognized immediately. The photo was slightly different from the ones I'd seen on her work display board at the wellness center. Softer lighting, a particular smile. But it was Glaza. She sent the first message within an hour of matching. Hello, Martin. How are you finding Cebu? I hope you are enjoying your stay here, Po. I sat with the phone for a moment. Then I typed back something appropriately vague. Loving it. Weather is wonderful. Food is incredible. Still finding my feet, but already feel at home. Friendly people. Her reply came quickly. She was glad. She asked what part of the Netherlands he was from. I said Amsterdam originally, but had lived in Rotterdam for many years. She said she'd always wanted to visit Europe. Sun very cold, she'd heard? I said yes, very cold compared to here, but beautiful in summer. I want to describe what it felt like, reading those messages. I've thought about how to put it. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness, exactly. It was more like watching a recording of something you were in, recognizing the patterns, the rhythms, the particular way she asked questions and then waited. Identical in cadence to our early conversations. The same warmth. The same careful, patient interest. I'd thought that warmth was for me. It was for whoever was currently on the end of the line. She was good at it. I'll give her that. I kept it going for 2 more days, keeping Martin's replies friendly and slightly slow, like a man who wasn't quite sure how the app worked. She asked about his work. Retired engineer, I said. Infrastructure projects mostly. She said her father had worked in construction. We talked about Bohol, which she said was her home province and very beautiful. Had he considered visiting? I said, perhaps, yes. She said the chocolate hills were something everyone should see once. And I thought, I'm going to see the chocolate hills. Just not the way this conversation is heading. On the 8th day of the Martin experiment, a message arrived that was slightly longer than the others. Martin, I hope you don't mind me sharing something with you. I feel bad even saying this, but I have an uncle who has been in the hospital since last week. He had a stroke. The medical bills are very difficult for our family. I feel so embarrassed to say this, but I don't know who else to ask. If you could help even a little, 25,000 pesos, I would be so grateful, and I will pay back when I can. I'm sorry. I hope this doesn't make you think badly of me. 25,000 pesos, about 390 euros. I put the phone down on the table and looked at it for a while. An uncle. She had never mentioned an uncle. In 6 weeks of conversations, in the careful accumulated detail of everything she'd shared about her life, the mother in Tagbilaran, the sister, the nephew in school, the small family, just us, she'd said once. We don't have many people. There had been no uncle. No uncle existed in the version of Glaza I knew. But here he was, in hospital. Stroke. 25,000 pesos. She had a menu. I'd been on it. Martin was now on it. Presumably, there were other names on it that I didn't know about and would never know about. Other men in other guest houses and service departments around the IT park area, each receiving their own carefully calibrated version of the same warmth. Each being gently, patiently, professionally worked toward the next item on the list. I didn't reply to Martin's messages. I blocked the profile. Then I opened my regular contacts and blocked Glaza's number. I sat there for a bit. The rooster outside was doing its rooster things despite it being 7 in the evening, which it had been doing since I arrived, and which I'd stopped finding strange weeks ago. The sari-sari store across the street had its light on, a small, warm yellow glow. Someone somewhere was warming up a karaoke machine. I didn't feel the need to confront her. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't cowardice or avoidance. It was a genuine assessment that there was nothing useful to be gained from it. What would I say? I know what you are? See, she knows what she is. What would she say? Deny it, probably. Or cry, or both. And none of it would change anything. The system had shown me exactly what it was. I didn't need to have an argument with a leaking pipe. You don't argue with it. You isolate it. You cap it off. You walk away. I opened the OceanJet website on my phone. Cebu to Tagbilaran, fast ferry, 1 hour and 45 minutes, 650 pesos each way. About 10 euros. Desi had mentioned the chocolate hills in my second week. He'd said, "You have to go, Bryn. You'll think you've gone mad when you see them. Hundreds of these perfectly round hills, all brown in the dry season, spread out as far as you can see." He said it looked like something a child drew when asked to draw hills. I'd been meaning to go since he said it. And then Glaza had happened. And somehow the weeks had filled up with other things. No reason for that to continue. I booked the morning ferry. Then I went to bed, and I slept fairly well, all things considered. The ferry left the Cebu pier at 7:30 in the morning. I had a window seat on the upper deck, a cup of coffee from a thermos I'd filled at the guest house, and nothing I was supposed to be doing. The harbor smell, diesel and salt and something fishy underneath, gave way to open water, and Cebu City got smaller behind me, and I sat there watching it go and found that I felt, more or less, fine. I want to be precise about that. Not fine in the sense of unaffected. I'd sent 1,450 euros to a woman who had been running a system on me since the first time I overtipped her, and she quietly filed that information away. That's not nothing. But I had 153,000 euros left, and 2 working knees. Well, 2 knees, working being generous. And I was on a boat in the Visayan Sea on a clear morning in May, and the situation was not, by any reasonable measure, a catastrophe. The chocolate hills were everything Desi had promised. I took a tricycle up from Tagbilaran to the viewing area at Carmen. The driver charged me 600 pesos for the round trip, about 9 euros, and waited for me at the bottom. And I stood on the observation deck in the early afternoon heat, and looked out at what looked, as Desi had correctly predicted, exactly like something drawn by a child. Hundreds of them. Perfectly round, brown at the tips in the dry season, spreading out to the horizon in every direction. Absolutely mad. Absolutely real. I took a photo and sent it to Niov and Sorsha on the family WhatsApp, and the caption said, "Bohol. Told you I'd be grand." Niov sent back a string of question marks. Sorsha sent a thumbs up and then, after a moment, a small red heart. That was enough. I stayed 5 days. Saw the tarsiers at a sanctuary outside Corella. Tiny things, enormous eyes, deeply unimpressed by tourists, which I respected. Had the best lation of my life at a place in Tagbilaran that someone at my guest house recommended, pork belly from a market stall, skin like crackling should always be, but never is back home. Swam once, briefly, at a beach near Panglao, which was warm enough to feel like a bath and clear enough to see my feet in 3 meters of water, which is not an experience available in the Shannon estuary. I thought about Glaza intermittently, not obsessively, more the way you think about a job after you've finished it, turning it over to check you've understood it correctly, making sure you haven't missed anything. Here is what I concluded. She probably does have a mother in Tagbilaran who needed cataract surgery. I say this because the Philippines has no real social safety net for elderly people, and a masseuse earning 18,000 pesos a month genuinely cannot fund that out of her own pocket without help. And the particular way she described it, carefully, once, without pressing, felt like a person describing a real problem, not an invented one. The crying when I gave her the money. I still think that was real. I think the 35,000 pesos went to Tagbilaran. I think her mother can see better now than she could before. The rest, the nephew's enrollment, the salary loan, the medical check, and the uncle who appeared for Martin but had never appeared for me, some of it may have been real, some of it probably wasn't. And I've stopped trying to draw a clean line between the two because I don't think the line is clean. That's the thing about this kind of operation. It works precisely because it's not entirely false. An entirely false thing is easier to recognize. You build it on something real, something that earns genuine trust, and then you extend past the truth by increments so small that the person on the other end doesn't feel the transition. She was good at it. She was very good at it. I should say that without bitterness, because I don't feel bitter. I feel something closer to professional respect, which is a strange thing to say about someone who took 1,450 euros from me. But there it is, and she identified what I needed, to be useful, to be the person who fixes things, and she built a structure around it that was tailored precisely to that need. That's skilled work. Unethical, yes, obviously, but skilled. Now, here is what I want to say to anyone watching this who is in Cebu, or thinking about going to Cebu, or anywhere else in the Philippines, and finding themselves in a situation that feels like what I've described. I'm not going to tell you that every person who asks for help is running a system. That would be wrong, and it would be unfair, and it would make you into someone who can't have a human conversation without treating it as a threat assessment. The Philippines is a country where family obligation runs deep and genuine, where supporting your parents isn't manipulation, it's just what you do, and where a lot of people are navigating real financial hardship with real dignity. Most of the people who were kind to me in Cebu were kind because they were kind. But here is the one thing I'd ask you to do, the thing Roloff gave me, which cost him nothing and saved me considerably more than it cost me to learn it. Before you open your wallet, before you decide someone knows you well enough to deserve your trust in that particular way, ask them something that requires them to actually know you. Not a test, not an interrogation, just a question that can only be answered correctly by someone who was paying attention. The name of your daughter, the thing you said about your old job, the reason you gave for leaving wherever you left. See what comes back. Not because everyone is false, but because the ones who are false are counting on you not checking. They are counting on the fact that you feel guilty for suspecting them, that you don't want to be the suspicious foreigner, the bitter expat, the man who can't trust anyone. They are counting on your decency being stronger than your attention. Check anyway. Your decency doesn't require you to be careless. I went back to Cebu after Bohol, kept meeting Desi for coffee on Salinas Drive, kept going to the sports bar to watch the hurling on whatever tiny screen they could find. Did not go back to the wellness center, not out of bitterness, but because there's another 1-2 streets away, and the coffee in the waiting area is considerably better. I haven't told Neve and Sorsha the full story. Neve would be insufferable about it. Not unkind. I just very, very thorough. And Sorsha would worry. I'll tell them eventually, probably. In the meantime, they know I'm fine, which I am. And they know I'm staying, which I am. And they know Cebu has something called the Chocolate Hills that I think they'd both enjoy, which is true. She was good at her job, to be fair. Both jobs. And that's where we'll leave Brendan. What you've just heard is not the story we usually tell on Inside the Philippines. The man didn't lose everything. He didn't come home broken. He's still there, eating pork adobo, arguing about hurling, existing in the specific kind of peace that comes from being somewhere nobody knows your history. But I want to be honest with you about something before we sign off. Brendan's story is unusual not because the scam was unusual. The scam was completely ordinary. And it runs in wellness centers and coffee shops and shopping malls all over Cebu and Manila and every city in this country, where foreign men with savings accounts arrive carrying grief or loneliness or just the ordinary human need to be somewhere new. The scam is textbook. We've heard versions of it on this channel dozens of times. What's unusual is that he caught it. And the difference between Brendan and the men who didn't catch it was not intelligence, and it wasn't cynicism, and it wasn't some special knowledge of Filipino culture that protected him. It was one retired Dutch engineer asking one quiet question at the right moment, and Brendan being the kind of man who could hear it without getting defensive. One question. That's the whole margin. I also want to say this, because this channel tries to be honest about complexity. Glaza may well have a mother in Tagbilaran whose eyes are better now because of Brendan's 35,000 pesos. A masseuse in Cebu earns between 15,000 pesos and 18,000 pesos a month. She works on her feet for 8 to 10 hours a day, in a country with no public pension and no guaranteed health care, supporting family members who depend on her in ways that are entirely real and entirely unexaggerated. The line between genuine need and structured exploitation is not always where we'd like it to be. This channel doesn't excuse the scam, but it won't pretend the context doesn't exist, because the context is part of the story, and the story deserves to be told whole. Thank you for watching Inside the Philippines. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe. It helps more people find us. And more people finding us means more stories getting told. There's another one coming next week, and it's a different kind of story entirely. Different country, different man, different lesson. We'll see you then. The ferry left the Cebu pier at 7:30 in the morning. I had a window seat on the upper deck, a cup of coffee from a thermos I'd filled at the guest house, and nothing I was supposed to be doing. The harbor smell, diesel and salt, and something fishy underneath, gave way to open water, and Cebu City got smaller behind me, and I sat there watching it go and found that I felt, more or less, fine. I want to be precise about that. Not fine in the sense of unaffected. I'd sent 1,450 euros to a woman who had been running a system on me since the first time I overtipped her, and she quietly filed that information away. That's not nothing. But I had 153,000 euros left, and 2 working knees. Well, 2 knees, working being generous. And I was on a boat in the Visayan Sea on a clear morning in May, and the situation was not, by any reasonable measure, a catastrophe. The Chocolate Hills were everything Desi had promised. I took a tricycle up from Tagbilaran to the viewing area at Carmen. The driver charged me 600 pesos for the round trip, about 9 euros, and waited for me at the bottom. And I stood on the observation deck in the early afternoon heat and looked out at what looked, as Desi had correctly predicted, exactly like something drawn by a child. Hundreds of them. Perfectly round, brown at the tips in the dry season, spreading out to the horizon in every direction. Absolutely mad. Absolutely real. I took a photo and sent it to Niav and Sorsha on the family WhatsApp. The caption said, "Bohol. Told you I'd be grand." Niav sent back a string of question marks. Sorsha sent a thumbs up, and then, after a moment, a small red heart. That was enough. I stayed 5 days. Saw the tarsiers at a sanctuary outside Corella. Tiny things, enormous eyes, deeply unimpressed by tourists, which I respected. Had the best leishon of my life at a place in Tagbilaran that someone at my guest house recommended. Pork belly from a market stall, skin like crackling should always be, but never is back home. Swam once, briefly, at a beach near Panglao, which was warm enough to feel like a bath, and clear enough to see my feet in 3 meters of water, which is not an experience available in the Shannon estuary. I thought about Glaza, on and off. Not obsessively. You're more the way you think about a job after you've finished it, turning it over to check you've understood it correctly, making sure you haven't missed anything. Here's what I concluded. She probably does have a mother in Tagbilaran who needed cataract surgery. I say this because the Philippines has no real safety net for elderly people, and a masseuse earning 18,000 pesos a month genuinely cannot fund that out of her own pocket without help. And the way she described it, carefully, once, without pressing, felt like a person describing a real problem. The crying when I gave her the money. I still think that was real. I think the 35,000 pesos went to Tagbilaran. I think her mother can see better now than she could before. The rest, the nephew's enrollment, the salary loan, the medical check, to the uncle who appeared for Martin but had never appeared for me, some of it may have been real. Some probably wasn't. And I've stopped trying to draw a clean line between the two because I don't think the line is clean. That's the thing about a good operation. It works precisely because it's not entirely false. An entirely false thing is easier to spot. You build it on something real, something that earns genuine trust, and then you extend past the truth by increments so small that the person on the other end doesn't feel the transition. She was skilled. I'll say that plainly. She identified what I needed. To be useful, to be the person who fixes things. And she built a structure around exactly that. Unethical? Yes. But skilled. Now, here is what I want to say to anyone watching this. I'm not going to tell you that every person who asks for help is running something. That would be wrong and unfair. And it would turn you into a person who can't have a human conversation without treating it as a threat. The Philippines is a country where family obligation runs deep and genuine, where supporting your parents isn't a tactic, it's just what you do, and where a lot of people are navigating real hardship with real dignity. Most of the people who were kind to me in Cebu were kind because they were kind. But here is the one thing I'd ask you to do. The thing Roloff gave me, which cost him nothing, and saved me considerably more than it cost me to learn. Before you open your wallet, before you decide someone knows you well enough to deserve your trust in that particular way, ask them something that requires them to actually know you. Not an interrogation. Not a test with a score attached. Just a quiet check. The name of your daughter. There's the thing you said about your old job 3 weeks ago. The reason you gave for leaving wherever you left. See what comes back. Not because everyone is false, because the ones who are false are counting on you not checking. They are counting on you feeling guilty for suspecting them. Counting on the fact that you don't want to be the suspicious foreigner, the bitter man who can't trust anyone. They are counting on your decency being stronger than your attention. Check anyway. Your decency doesn't require you to be careless. I went back to Cebu after Bohol, kept meeting Desi for coffee on Salinas Drive. kept going to the sports bar to watch the hurling on whatever tiny screen they had available, did not go back to the wellness center, not out of bitterness, but because there's another 1-2 streets over, and the coffee in the waiting area is considerably better. I haven't told Niav and Sorsha the full story. Niav would be insufferable about it, not unkind, just very, very thorough, and Sorsha would worry. I'll tell them eventually. In the meantime, they know I'm fine, which I am. They know I'm staying, which I am. And they know Cebu has something called the Chocolate Hills that I think they'd both enjoy, which is also true. She was good at her job, to be fair. Both jobs. And that's where we leave Brendan. What you've just heard is not the story we usually tell on Inside the Philippines. The man didn't lose everything. He didn't come home hollow. He's still there, eating pork adobo, arguing about hurling, living the specific kind of quiet that comes from being somewhere nobody knows your history yet. But I want to be straight with you before we sign off. Brendan's story is unusual, not because the scam was unusual. The scam was entirely ordinary. It runs in wellness centers and cafes and malls across Cebu and Manila, and every city in this country where foreign men arrive carrying grief or loneliness or the simple human need to start somewhere new. We've heard versions of it on this channel more times than I can count. What's unusual is that he caught it. And the difference between Brendan and the men who didn't, it wasn't intelligence, it wasn't cynicism, it wasn't any special knowledge of Filipino culture or expat life. It was one retired Dutch engineer asking one quiet question at the right moment, and Brendan being willing to hear it. But one question. That's the whole margin. I'll also say this, because this channel tries to be honest about the full picture. Glaza may well have a mother in Tagbilaran, whose eyes are better now because of Brendan's 35,000 pesos. A masseuse in Cebu earns between 15,000 pesos and 18,000 pesos a month. On her feet all day. No pension, no safety net, supporting family in ways that are entirely real and entirely unexaggerated by any version of this story. The line between genuine need and structured exploitation is rarely as clean as we'd like. This channel doesn't excuse the scam, but it won't pretend the context doesn't exist, because the context is part of the story. And the story deserves to be told whole. Thank you for watching Inside the Philippines. If this one stayed with you, please like and subscribe. It helps more people find us. And more people finding us means more stories getting told honestly. There's another one coming next week. Different man, different situation, different lesson. We'll see you then.